So when you know a lot about food or any topic, I think it can be problematic in that you overthink food a little bit. So, I walk into a grocery store and I am already thinking about what I should be eating from a sustainability standpoint, from a nutrition standpoint. I think,
but you know all the companies represented on the
I do.
shelf as well. Like,
I do.
This company owns like these 6 brands here, and
yeah, but it's this information overload, right? So as you're walking in and you're assessing all these things, you're overthinking what the product needs to deliver. You're kind of maybe yes, you come in with the knowledge of which companies are good and why a cracker needs to be in a certain texture or format, or why do things like crackers have little holes sometimes punched in them? It's not for decoration, right? It's probably because...
No, I totally thought that was for decoration. So
Did
what?
You really?
Tell me.
Well,
9 out of 10 people might say the same.
Sometimes it is a decorative brand or but a lot of times when there's a mark on a product coming off a belt like that, it's extruded, it's made into these circles, and then there's some type of thing that usually has to release it or move it off the belt. So sometimes you get markings on products, but they're really a product of the process. It's not so much something that was deliberately placed there. It's just that you begin to associate that with it, the product needing that mark.
We're going to learn all kinds of stuff on this podcast. Starting with that one. All right. So when you're thinking about plant-based and the transition, the stuff that you were just talking about with the format of education, like has that penetrated major universities yet, or?
I would say it's beginning to. There are now a few smaller programs where they're addressing the needs around plant-based ingredients and plant-based foods. So
how so? I mean, as far as the needs.
So, for example, some universities have always had, let's say, a protein chemistry department, but that protein chemistry department always dealt with dairy products. So casein and whey, or maybe soy, because that was a very large volume protein. What we're seeing now is as proteins emerge and crops emerge and are being used more, whether it be pea or rice or lupin, you name it, there's very little that is known about it. So we haven't studied how they perform, how they function, how best to isolate them, all the things that we care about. So I think there's at least what I'll say is a realization that there's a gap.
Yeah, and are students bringing that up as far as questioning and we don't have answers, or what's forcing us to understand the gap?
I think, to be honest with you, I think it's that more of the generation today going into college is going more after things they're passionate about personally than I should be a lawyer, I should be somebody told me I should be this because it's a good career and I make good money. They're going after things that they care about and that they feel they could make a change for. So, for example, the Humane Society of the United States, for years, they've had programs that encourage folks who care about, let's say, animal rights or animal treatment to think about the food system and how they might have an impact. I think the link has not been from that to university specifically. It's more been individuals saying, go volunteer, go help the shelter, go. Whereas now I think we're maybe entering a phase, or we shortly will be, that link is made to let's educate students to say you could have a career where you're developing plant-based foods which help the planet, animals, your health, the water, the soil, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that is where there's still a gap, but I think there's a realization coming.
And how much do you, I mean, how much do you take from what you learn in university versus how much do you kind of develop what you're going to do if it's going to be in plant-based in that first year of work? Because I think after I left college, I used the majority of that education up in about 8 days, and then I had to figure out what's next. So the technology, especially the technology at scale, is changing quite rapidly, and also it's quite secretive. Like, so much of the plant-based movement is still, trade secret. So you don't know how to actually achieve food innovation or how to actually like create specific texturized products.
True. I think food science, so first of all, I'm a huge proponent of food science and nutrition as a knowledge base for just a human being, because I think it makes you better at a lot of things in life. It gives you a great foundation for chemistry, physics, biology, biochemistry, all those things. So saying that first, I think you're right. You do develop a lot of what you need in your first year or two of your job, because you're given a very specific task to go after, and you are resilient and you build the things that you need. I think that there's maybe a small difference with food science. You're being taught principles that carry over. So, for example, if I teach you what a carbohydrate molecule looks like, or a protein molecule, or a fiber,
that's not changing
structure,
anytime soon.
I'm not gonna. Great, exactly. They're not good. They're not changing, right? But what's important is the lens that you use to think about them. So a carbohydrate in a chicken versus a plant-based ingredient, the carbohydrate is the same. I think you're taking premises from those areas and you're applying them forward. I think the difference is that we need it's more of a mindset, and I think the ability to take products that have been made for hundreds of years and processed for hundreds of years and find ways to match them with totally plant-based ingredients. So, and I know I've probably said that a few times now, but that really, this mimicking is really where the market is right now. I mean, the hope is that we're going to get past that and we're going to actually innovate and make products that people have never seen before. They can't compare to anything because it's new. Yeah. And it's plant-based and it's not anything you have ever seen before. But right now we're in the phase of match the things I love so I can still eat them.
Yeah, it seems to be the tipping point. I mean, as soon as there was a burger that would bleed, that was made from plants, then everything tipped. Everybody freaked out and a market was born, because the veggie burger is not a new thing.
No.
It's been in the freezer section for over a decade, probably longer than that.
But it used to more look like mashed beans in a Pocky Puck, which, now it bleeds and it looks like a burger.
Yeah, so now we see burgers that bleed. You see chicken that sizzles, that's not made of chicken. You see eggs that look gorgeous and delicious. And that mimicry. How long do you think that this is going to be like the pinnacle? Because what does come after that?
I think what comes after that is a phase of breakthrough innovation where we're creating new categories. We're creating new types of food that didn't exist before, because we now have a new toolkit. We have a new portfolio of items to utilize. We know that some of these ingredients have very different properties. Sometimes they're not good because we want it to act like yogurt and it won't act like yogurt. But what if we actually use the lens to say, let's take those ingredients and actually make the things that they're good at making versus.
Makes me think of like vitamins that actually taste good, because vitamins taste like vitamins.
Right. True. That is very true.
I'm just trying to think
vitamins.
I'm just trying to think of like what is next, because ultimately, I think there's a growing awareness that the things that go in our bodies matter probably more than we thought. We thought our bodies were quite resilient to essentially anything that we'd put in them. And then over time, whether it's coming from news outlets or statistical data or the CDC, everybody's essentially addressing this same topic as far as just pay attention to what goes in.
Right.
This mimicry is starting to help us adjust what goes in, right? And just create balance. We're not trying to turn the world into vegans.
Exactly.
But as far as additional thing, D3, especially people who live in a northern state, could probably use more of that. Finding a way to actually get that into the body to where it's not nuanced or, just awkward. Because vitamin regimens are not, something that you plan on doing when you're in your 20s. And a lot of people don't even ever do it. It's just so foreign, and it's such a learned behavior that it sucks, and you might try it for a month and then forget about it, and then days go by. So
I think vitamins are interesting to me too, just because they're something that I think a lot of people take without maybe necessarily needing them. I think D3 is a perfect example.
Totally agree.
Perfect example of something that's deficient. But I look at how many people have just started popping pills because it's like an insurance plan for their diet, and I'm just not sure that's the,
That's probably not the case either. Where 14 different pills go in before the end of the night. Anything I did before that, I'm cool with. This is good. Like an offset.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but you do see. We're finding these different ways. There's a lot of people that are trying to get this idea of wellness, whether it's going to be like a greens mix or something like that, or turn it into a smoothie shake and hide it. You're essentially trying to flavor mask things inside of that stuff.
Right.
Like trying to figure out how to get good things into these learned behaviors that we learn as kids. Like we love to eat pancakes and waffles and cookies and all of these things as kids where you have these emotional connections to them. Burgers. Like I grew up, I feel like every summer we didn't even eat inside where I grew up.
Yeah.
I was just used to the grill. I know the smell of the grill. And so finding ways to essentially like recreate that emotion, that's like the leap that a few brands are actually doing really well at.
Yeah, I think there's the emotional side of things, and then there's also just kind of like you were, I think, going at before that was the nutritional side. Just people who are looking for that balance of protein or fiber or other ingredients that they're not getting in their diet today, and they know they should be. So I feel like there's sort of a dichotomy. You're either the person who it's very emotional and you really just want those craveable homemade moments, or you're really driving hard to say, I'm just trying to do the right things for my body, for my family, and make sure there's a good health status there. I think right now it's not easy to do both at the same time.
Yeah. And I honestly think that's even the person doing that for their family. That's a learned behavior. That was probably built in from their childhood. Or, there's an event happened. They got married to somebody who is a health advocate, or there was some kind of event that's going to scare them.
Right. Some kind of health diagnosis.
Yeah. Those are the shifts.
Right.
That's where, obviously you're going to get the most sustained effort there in dietary changes and whatnot. But I think the reality is it's hard. It's hard. It can be very expensive to make those changes. And that's another thing that's very, very hard to sustain. Like there's a point where you can't keep on buying like the same $6 thing when it's sitting on the shelf next to the $1.99 thing. You got more to buy.
And more prep time usually as well.
Yeah. We haven't unlocked that yet.
No, and I think there's a lot of things still to unlock. We say tipping point, and I think we're at the beginning. I still feel we're near the beginning of the tipping point, not the that we're passing through that yet. I still feel there's a lot of people who aren't even aware very much of anything going on in the plant-based movement. They might have seen a Beyond Burger ad or, some alternative burger ad, and they kind of glance at it. Oh yeah, I've heard of that, but they're not actively pursuing any changes. I think it'd be interesting to know a little bit more about what that percentage looks like in our world today right now. Because I think it's really easy for folks that are in the industry of plant-based to think that it's tipped further than it has.
Yeah, totally. They could drive from, the states you pass on the way to Colorado from Minnesota. You're going to pass a lot of gas stations where there's no plant-based option in there. And they'll look at you kind of funny when you ask. And it's not, I don't think it's because they're ignoring it. I just don't think that the businesses that are, have those opportunities, either they haven't made the right connections there, or they're just not trying to get to that spot, because that is also hard. Those are some of the harder minds to change.
Yep. I had 2 menus today. One, the only option was a house salad with tomatoes as the option, and the other was a sub with lettuce and tomato in it. Those were my 2 options today. So I was very excited.
Yeah, that's what I get excited about working to change, is essentially not necessarily just going after the next open availability at Whole Foods. I love Whole Foods, and they're helping us pioneer a lot of this stuff. But getting these solutions to places where I think they could be more needed. I think that's an important thing to continue to work towards.
Absolutely.
It doesn't really agree with the amount of turns that you're going to get on a retail shelf. Today the economics don't agree with us going into those markets and trying to get into those locations. And then once you're even there, figuring out how to, get all the information to the customers that are around there.
Yeah, I think, and that's the key challenge, is first of all, making it available in locations where it's going to be seen, and trials are going to happen, and education in some ways going to happen. I think it's going to take a different model than we have today.
Yeah.
Putting it on a shelf and saying, here's our product, it's plant-based, and expecting that it's going to scale up so fast that it's going to be flying off the shelves. I think it's maybe there's a model where it's a lot more culinary driven in a store, showing what the products are, how they perform, what they taste like, giving examples, telling the story of why it's important, helping people to understand that. I think it's a very different model than what has existed in retail up until now.
Yeah, and maybe that helps me understand a little bit more of what's next. It might not just be the next thing.
I think it's a new way of selling products. I think it's a new way of interacting with, it
was an elevator.
Oh. Okay. I think it's a new way of interacting with. It's a new model. I don't know that I have the exact answer, but I do know that when I sit down with groups of students, okay, you could argue they're more impressionable because they're in high school or they're in college. They do have very strong opinions and minds of their own, so I'm not swaying them. There is a shift and a change in what they believe, what they want to work towards, how they want to change their diet. They want to start educating other people about it. It's going to take more than a sell sheet and a website and something on a shelf that says, come by me because I'm the new plant-based item. I don't think that's going to be it. I don't think that's going to be enough.
Yeah, there does seem to be more enthusiasm too. I mean, coming from those age groups, when some of these items were introduced to, I mean, myself as a reference, but even trying to introduce this to family members that are my age or friends that are my age, there was always this immediate comparison.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's not like this, and it doesn't perform like this, and here's the thing that I like. When, the generations that we get exposed to, and we're lucky enough to be around, outlets to go and get something plant-based or to demo new foods, they're just not as used to those traditional dairy products. Like, it's already been kind of woven in. So if I put something new on their plate, they're kind of more surprised and happy about it and kind of enthusiastic to try it again, versus the comparison model,
right?
Which I think that's, maybe we just grow out of that too.
I think
and that's
we
what
might.
Forces the change.
And I think parents have a big onus on themselves if they want to help with that change, because putting those things on their children's plates at a young age and not making a big deal about it, and just kind of saying, this is what we eat, this is a chicken nugget, but it's not really a chicken nugget, it comes from plants.
Yeah.
And not making a big deal about it. Like, I think that's part of it. I also think we're our world and especially just look at the United States. We're morphing to a place where there's many folks from outside of our country living within our country walls, and many of them grew up in societies that didn't eat meat ever.
Mm-hmm.
And they're coming here saying, why would I go buy a veggie burger? Can't you create foods that taste good, that don't have to mock something that I've never eaten before? So I think you have to think of it in those terms. We are very a little egocentric in that we want a burger, we want a hot dog, we want pot pie that has chicken chunks in it because that's what we grew up with. There's a whole group of people who've never even eaten any of those things. So we really need to think a little bigger than just, where we've been and what we're growing up doing. That's why I think when you look at India and you look at China and you look at some of these other countries, there's a huge opportunity to be innovating in a very different way there. And I think a lot of what many of the companies are doing is just taking things that we develop for people in the U.S. and just throwing them over and hoping that they stick. They're getting a lot of press because plant-based in general is a positive message. But I think as the products evolve and as we're talking about this new innovation category, I think there's a bigger way to think about it.
So what does it take? Just kind of educate me as misunderstanding the market or misunderstanding what really needs to happen when we come up with a new thing. What are all the things that it really takes for that new thing to get to every state in the lower 48? What are those stages?
Stages from, do you mean from like a distribution standpoint?
I think that's just part of it.
Okay. I wasn't sure if you meant actually getting, because I mean, a lot of challenges that the food industry sees is depending where certain companies are selling into certain retailers. Obviously they have maybe a limited reach if they're an entrepreneur versus a large company, if they mostly work with a certain list of grocery stores versus being more broadly distributed. So, I mean, that's a very obvious one, right?
Yeah.
If you don't have a good distribution model, you're not going to be getting into the 48 states. I think I'm referring more to, like, as I'm learning more and more about fermentation and the opportunities that does provide. Right.
For that to really become a mainstream alternative to whether it's going to be animal proteins or a protein that has allergen-specific qualities, to really take the message that they have as far as being able to develop a complete protein,
mm-hmm.
and then seeing it in the majority of states? Or is that more of just kind of a niche and you might get exposed to that on those coastal states where, you know, it's going to be affordable to get to it, and then you're going to have distribution to get to it.
I mean, I think everything sort of starts, on the West Coast or the East. It appears that we have a two-sided market, and the center sort of comes along later, depending what the product is, depending how appealing the technology or the finished food or beverage item is. I think if I think about what you're saying, it's very important to understand that different regions, even within the United States, have different preferences. There's very different, as you know, very different demographics in different regions. There's different eating patterns. There's different eating preferences. I worked for a company where we knew that certain flavors in products were very much liked in the lower southern states and very much disliked in Seattle and the Northwest.
Yeah.
We learned
the level of spice just goes down the more north you get.
But even some of these were like cherry flavor versus lemon flavor, or watermelon versus chocolate, so people think that's funny, but it's very true. If you launch a cherry flavored product in certain states, it will not do as well. It won't. So I think if I liken that, if I bring that analogy forward, I think first of all, if we use fermentation as an example, fermentation can create a lot of different product attributes, from health and wellness to different sensations on the tongue, all the way through to a product that has a different texture. So if we think about even mycoproteins, which are from mushrooms and mushroom fungal technology, all of those could be utilized in any state or distributed to any state. I think the question would be, what end format is actually going to appeal to those folks? So it kind of goes back to insights. Like in certain regions, a barbecue sandwich is the holy grail. In other regions, nobody eats that. And so really deeply understanding, I think, the key segments and which ones are resonating in which regions. I don't know if it's state by state as much as it's just kind of there's kind of 5 regions that we break it down. So I think a lot of it is research and understanding and asking people questions, learning where people are right now with these technologies, and maybe not even with these technologies, just with sharing an idea and seeing if you bounce it off of them, what happens? Do they laugh? Do they get excited? Do they say, this is amazing, I can't wait to try it? Are they making a face?
Some people are offended.
Some are offended.
Yeah.
I mean, some people don't understand either that fermentation has been around forever and it's used in a lot of products they love, like beer and bologna and cheese and, you name it, bread. These have been around. These technologies used to ferment have been around for a very, very long time.
Yeah. So what are some of the responses that you've got working on the things that you're working on?
I would say that the response that I get the most is, why are you trying to turn everyone into a vegan?
Yeah.
And I often say I am not trying to turn everyone into a vegan. I'm not trying to turn everyone into a vegetarian. I'm simply trying to elevate certain products in the market so that we have more choices to distribute the impact that we're having, whether it be nutritionally, whether it be planetary, whether it be on animals. Doesn't matter. We're redistributing where all the pressure points are. But yes, I would say the number one pushback I get is why, or do you have proof that becoming a vegan is going to save the world, or something very prophetic?
Sure. Yeah, it seems that if we're working on something in plant-based, that extreme is assumed. I'm just trying to push a little bit more balance in there.
Yeah, and I think that is hugely misunderstood by anyone who hears anything about plant-based. They immediately think that we're just trying to remove all animal from the supply chain.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then, so what do you say?
So what I typically say is I'm really working on, through plant-based ingredients and plant-based foods, I am really working to make it a level playing field, right? Go into the store and the dairy cheese and the plant-based cheese, they cost the same, they look the same, they taste the same. Make a choice.
Yeah. You're essentially
if they're at
choosing
parity,
our balanced attributes.
If they're at parity, then that's really what my goal is. I would really like to see there not be a disadvantage in their mind of, wow, I'm giving up this melt of cheese.
Right.
My
it's just
my
more
grocery
treated as
bill.
the same topping.
Right.
They're two different toppings.
They're two, yeah. So you can choose. I mean, right now we're talking about the protein counter, right? It's not the meat counter anymore, because the plant-based meats are being merchandised right next to, or very, very close proximity to, the beef in the same type of container, the same type of clear wrap over the top. They look the same in the package. Now, right now, the price parity is still there.
Yeah.
There is no price
wide.
parity. Yeah.
Right.
So you've got a leap there that someone's going to say, well, I'm making burgers for 30 people. I think I'm going to buy ground beef, because maybe it's more affordable. And wouldn't it be great if they walked in and I, sometimes I'll say to them, please tell me what would be the downside of buying the plant-based meat if everything was the same. What would you choose and why? And a lot of times people can't answer the question, or they won't answer the question.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like you're still kind of tied to a camp, when you use the word plant-based or vegan or vegetarian or carnivore. And it's still very segmented towards camps and those belief systems. And I think you're right. I think there will probably be, a turn where we start evaluating this stuff as layers. What's going to be my topping? What's going to be, the protein attribute that I put on the plate? What's going to be the greens attribute? Like all of those things could look very, very different.
Absolutely. And I often think too about just marketing and messaging and how people relate to brands, and thinking about creating a brand that doesn't even talk about it, doesn't even really mention it.
Yeah. And I don't think you can do that yet today.
Not yet. Not yet. But I do believe maybe that if you can make something that's that compellingly good, and you don't have to talk about it or compare it or make these, juxtapositions in the two products, then.
Yeah. And I think the price parity is the driver of that. I mean, you still need to do so much convincing to get somebody to take this leap to buy something that's going to be 50% more, or even more than that. I mean, it's quite expensive to really endorse a lot of the plant-based options out there. So the marketing has such a lift. And you're also up against probably inauthentic marketing too.
True. No, very true.
I think there are the brands that really strive to make those decisions and that aim towards balance, or that aim towards wellness or taste, whatever the attribute. They're going to avoid cutting those corners, and they're really proud of a product that gets put out there. And that unfortunately gets lumped into the ones that did, make consolidated choices and cut down on quality in some of the products, and it might not taste as good, but it was cheaper, and that's the one that gets tasted. And then that gets lumped in with the one that never got tasted because it was a little bit more expensive, but everybody associates that flavor or that lack of quality to the whole section. So, yeah, I think marketing does have Yeah, it's gonna have to turn a corner for some kind of attribution to the products that have a way to give customers a little bit more power to make decisions on the things that they really kind of stick to their guns on for flavor.
Agreed.
Or wellness.
Or right, for whatever their most important category is.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard out there.
It's a tough market. I mean, I look back to like kind of the nutrition bar market, which became, when years ago when I was really kind of in the center of it, became very inundated with products and new products. And, we called it the Isle of Hope, right? It was, you walk down and you're hoping that this is going to help you lose weight. You're hoping this is going to help your beauty, and it just got so inundated, and the messaging got so diluted because so many people were jumping in, and there were so many that weren't maybe as authentic, and to your point, I think you start to lump things all together. And for a while, the protein bar market took a bit of a dip because people were saying, well, we're being inundated with messaging in this. So I think with plant-based, I do sometimes think right now we're in a phase where there's just, the volume of products being launched, and some at okay quality, some at decent quality, some really not. And the messaging that's coming out, that's very not clear. There's not a lot of clarity there. And I just, I worry sometimes that we're going to be taking a step back. We might be hitting the beginning of a tipping point. We're going to be taking a step back before we take the big leap forward, as you say.
Yeah. And then
we have a lot to learn still.
Even on top of that messaging, you've got people just waiting to attack too.
Yes.
It's just, they've already got this preconceived notion that the attack's going to be negative. I'm going to find something wrong with this product. It's not going to deliver on one or two variables. I'm going to lean into that. And then that messaging also starts to flood, some of the authenticity that's out there. And it makes it even more difficult. You're kind of giving more ammunition to somebody who might still be in discovery mode to avoid it and kind of go back to their roots.
And sustainability is a perfect piece of that because, a lot of the companies are working towards life cycle analysis for their products. And some of them are cutting corners in how they do it. Some of them are borrowing data from meta-analysis that says a certain ingredient has this type of life cycle analysis on it. And so you have people who are really doing the hard work and providing the real data. And you have folks maybe who are maybe cutting a few corners. And then you're trying to compare that to animal products. And you're trying to make all those comparisons. It's not easy right now to delineate sort of who's gone through the right process and who hasn't. So you've got a bunch of people telling stories on life cycle analysis and trying to put a mark for their sustainability story, and it's just not easily interpretable by a consumer.
No, it's very hard. It's almost impossible. I feel like that your conversation about the food science bringing more of this information into colleges could be earlier. You might need to this could be part of basic curriculum because if you just think about it, there are all of these opportunities to put something in our bodies. Goes in through the mouth. It affects us for a very long time, good or bad. And you don't get, education has changed. I didn't really get any of it going in. But I feel like that element of food science shouldn't be so niche.
Well, that's what I've been trying to promote for years, is getting the word out. So high school students that tell me, well, I never knew there was such a major, that they know. And it's not just about going into college. It's about, yes, they have most schools have some sort of elective.
Right.
That is like, they called it home economics years ago. Then they called it nutritional education, something like that. But it's not a mandatory requirement. What I find interesting is I think if it was, and if folks knew about it earlier, and maybe it was middle school, maybe it was elementary school, I'm not really sure where the right level is, but really taking the understanding that we create foods for food safety first and foremost. We don't want anyone getting sick because of the things they're eating. Nutrition, because that nourishes the body. And oh, by the way, there's a whole industry out there that studies, researches, needs excellent candidates to work and provide the next generation of food for the next generation of people. We don't get that message out till usually students are freshmen in college. I didn't know about food science till I was a sophomore in college.
Right.
So again, it's two levels. It's not, I know I keep talking about education because I'm very passionate about that, but I think you're right. It's about getting more people educated for the future. It's also just about teaching people to eat better. I mean, we're one of the only species I feel that doesn't teach our young how to eat properly.
Yeah, it's not one of our talents.
It's not one of our talents, right?
Yeah, but I'd say it's confusing because you just talked about like two major focuses as far as food safety and nutrition. There's a lot out there that we put that by the wayside. I'm going to put something out there that is going to be delicious, and I think there's more of a willingness from, the young people today to where they're excited. I mean, I know a bunch of high school students and even middle school students that, I coach now, and they think about food as performance. They have really interesting conversations with me about this stuff. And it just blows my mind that they're already kind of on that train as far as, understanding, if they're going to play in the game, they know their meal before the game. It's just wild. So I think there's more of a willingness. If it wasn't niche or wasn't elective, it essentially just became, I guess, more heavily available.
Right.
Then maybe we wouldn't be in the situation 10 years from now where we're still kind of relying on that marketing leverage.
Right.
Agreed.
Completely agreed.
If they knew what they were looking at similar, I'd say can't really expect them to look at the aisles the same way that you do, but with a lens that's a little bit more educated, they're going to kind of understand the balance that's out there. And there's going to be times and places for that delicious, awesome thing that can be manufactured and created, and it is great. And food it serves great emotional relief. Nobody eats perfect.
No.
Nobody should. We're not here long enough.
No, right. And food should be delightful, and it should be, and it should connect people. Food has a lot of different roles, and I think, depending who you are and where you focus the most in your life, sometimes you get a little slanted one way or the other if you get obsessed about nutrition, or you kind of fall off the wagon and go the opposite direction for a few, but you go through phases with it. And I think understanding that there's balance and that you can do that, you can make those choices and you can be a good person and healthy person, but you don't always have to eat perfectly.
No. And some of the most surprising things that I've learned about food is you can recover from phases so fast, and still enjoy it. I mean, it's an enjoyable ride to, go through phases where you're going to be, I mean, anybody does this, but there's going to be phases where you consume more alcohol. There's going to be phases where you consume extra amounts of animal protein because it's going to be a certain season or whatnot. Or you're going to, just like there's a Christmas or Thanksgiving, mine's more like Thanksgiving to Christmas past New Year's. And then you start to recover. But food's so healing in that way to where it allows us, we're lucky enough to have all these options,
right? To
where there's foods available to allow us to go on, not permanent diets, but essentially like a recovery diet from those, delightful phases. Because I think that, from just a human perspective, it's consistency can, be a double-edged sword.
No, absolutely. And I don't know, something you said just made me think about if I have a dream about what it could look like going forward, I think about the younger, let's say elementary, middle school folks. I would love to see some kind of curriculums that take them through a couple different things. One could be more storytelling almost around cultural experiences and different cultural foods. Look at how sushi has sort of come from nowhere to being a staple in
Right.
many people's diets who never had tried a piece of sushi in their life. Okay. So just one example is sushi, but you look at all of the different foods, and then for plant-based, I feel like I can see the story coming. You know, it's an elementary school, and there's a curriculum that's telling the story of, over the last X amount of years, we've started adding more plant-based ingredients so that people could have a variety of choices, from dairy to fake dairy, from meat to, replacements for meat. Like, that whole story will start to be told at a younger age. And I think that's where we steal the thunder from just marketing lift.
Yeah.
Because you're now, these children are seeing whatever their parents are doing. So if their parents are teaching them these things, that's great. If not, they're seeing what these stories look like from what's happened in the past. It's almost like the history of food. And just bringing it forward and saying all of these, we've got cultures. You may not have been to Thailand yet, but this is what they enjoy in Thailand, and giving them a chance to taste that, and then also understanding that there's just an evolution that takes place in the food supply from where we were to where we are, and them understanding that, I think, helps them make choices on their own going forward.
Yeah. So I think there's plenty of opportunity, but what you're saying is might require a little bit of patience and let this evolution take its time.
Yeah.
Because it's all going the same direction.
Yeah.
And I think some markets are going to go a little bit faster than others. And, scale innovation happens a little bit quicker for some applications. Patience is you can essentially always rely on it. It's going to bring change.
If you look at the milks category,
perfect example.
I mean, that has been around for a long time, and it started to tip past the early soy only phase that had been there for a long time, or maybe soy rice phase, and it's mainstream. I mean, I would say that is probably the one category that has pushed further than any other food segment to get into the penetration in people's homes, the growth rates, just the presence it has in the market.
And it just continues to speed up. So once it goes through that evolution, then you're going to get more variety, more preference, more outlets for it, or availability. Now, I mean, it's how do you want your coffee? Mm-hmm. Here's the 5 different applications of milk you can have. It's a very, very different, world from just 7-8 years ago.
Absolutely.
But it kind of requires that. It's not necessarily just acceleration. You have this evolution from some of the first technologies that make their way in and create, it's got to be endorsed by somebody who can really deliver at scale.
Right.
And then that variety happens over time. And I think that'll happen to, the beef alternatives.
Absolutely.
Like the burger market, that we look at it, and I think there are some super interesting options out there. They continue to taste better and better and perform and mimic better and better and better. But then there's going to start to be preferences. Just like grass-fed happened to beef. There's this evolution of preference, more willingness of price variety. And again, like those applications start to change faster and faster and faster over time. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. That was fun.
Yeah, that was very fun.
Okay, we'll wrap it up. That was cool. Did I miss anything?
I don't think so. I didn't know how long we were.
I don't even know what time it was.
It's like 7. Yeah,
okay.
It's been an hour about. Yeah, I think we hit. As we're talking, I'm thinking of
There's more. We
I'm
own this. We can come back for.
Not for tonight, but I'm thinking of just because I feel like my brain is like a little slow tonight just from all the driving. But I'm thinking of a couple additional topics that I think we could really drive through on.
I think the education one we talked about was awesome.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like I
right?
guess.
What do you think, Drew? Is this like interesting content? Yeah.
I feel like there's so many people out there talking about like the plant-based movement that I'm trying to find ways to talk about it that are innovative and different. And I think the education piece is one that I harp on it all. You know this already. I harp and harp and harp, but I do think there's other ways that we can angle it that are going to give a fresh perspective. I just don't want to sound like the other 20 people who are like, let's talk about the plant-based market and what's growing and what's not growing. And it's like, go read GFI's report. But if you want to know, go read the report.
Could you imagine the shift that you would see if we educated food science like we educated mathematics? It's just as important.
My question is, why the hell not?
Right. But could you imagine the shift? All of a sudden, families would... right now...
We might not have an obesity problem.
Yeah. But right now...
I mean, like, let's talk about it real. Like, we might not have heart disease in the way we do right now. Now, I'm not saying people are all going to become like, I eat celery and I
I just think
carrots every day and I'm so healthy. That's not what I'm saying, but... knowing is half the battle. You can choose to not do anything about it, but I'm telling you, when I've had probably, I'm not exaggerating, 7 college level classes that I taught. And in each class, these were classes of like 30 to 40 kids, I had between 7 and 12. That's like 25% of the class come to me and say, how do I get into this? Yeah. What do I do? Like, can you help me? Can you give me your card? Can you like connect me? What do I do next? And I'm like, how do they not know this? And they're like, we never heard of food science. It's every single time. And it's so frustrating to me. Yeah. There's tons of jobs out there. And there's a whole like group of the world waiting to know more about foods and how they're prepared and like not knowing where your food comes from, like all of those things. You ask people where an egg comes from, and they say the grocery store. It's like, no, okay, before that. And literally there's time, like they just have no clue. It's not just developing foods. It's not just food safety. It's not just nutrition. It's the whole thing.
Yeah, it's just it's an understanding. You got to educate it in a way. I think if there's, what would create a giant change? The reason I use mathematics is you can go in and be a mathematician and you will learn proofs and you will be able to study in a way or execute as an engineer in a way that nobody can think of. That'd blow people's minds. And that's what food scientists do today. Food scientists understand food like that.
It's a great analogy. If we educated
but mathematics at a fundamental level, if it were educated in that way to earlier generations, then it just becomes part of your everyday. You utilize it more.
Exactly.
And I think that would be an exciting thing to see.
But I also think like whoever decided we needed to force feed people calculus to the 3rd level. When you're like, I've never in my life probably ever used calculus again. Now, have I used algebra to like every level and geometry? And yeah, okay, I'm not suggesting that we should get rid of math. My point is, who decided that level of math was so important, but yet we can't even talk about what food science is?
No, and learning about food is fun. That's the thing.
It is. People love it.
It's fun. You could make that would be the best class.
They love it. And it doesn't have to be just beer and wine. It could be, people love those types of learnings too, and how hops bring flavor to your IPA but every single thing you love about food has a very specific reason. It was put in there to do that. Or it was put in there and discovered that it imparts that characteristic or that. And it's like CSI for food,
Yeah.
right? It's working backwards. So yeah, there's so much to talk about in the food science space. And I think early on when I did talk about food science, I didn't do it in a great way. And people took it as I was trying to preach, like, go into food science. I'm trying to convince you to take this major. And it really goes a lot deeper than that. It's more that I believe people can be better for themselves, for their families, for everything if they know more. So.
Yeah. All right. We're going to lean into that one next. And before our next podcast, please figure out that fundamentals of food science.
I'm going to.
All right.